Welcome to Texas 2036's virtual series, Straight Talk Texas, where you have a front row seat to conversations on topics important to our future. My name is Enisha Shropshire, Director of Board and External Affairs here at Texas 2036. Today, founder and chairman Tom Luce will be joined by Bank of America executives Jennifer Chandler, Dallas Market President, and Michael Pavell, Fort Worth Market President. They would discuss Bank of America's long-standing place in communities across Texas and how they've responded to the needs of small businesses. Tom, Jennifer, and Mike?
I know the bank was heavily involved in processing the, what we all learned to say, the PPP loans, and y'all jumped right on that. Tell us and our viewers what that was like.
Happy to, Tom. First, I want to thank you and Anisha for having us on today. I know you've got to be incredibly busy with everything Texas 2036 and now with the recent spike here in Texas as well. So thank you for all that you're doing. And Mike and I are so glad to be visiting with you today. Happy to touch on PPP. I have to tell you, it was one of the most challenging but most rewarding times of my career. I'm sure Mike would say the same. We were working just 24/7. We were one of the first firms to step up a program and take applications and ended up taking the highest volume of applications. Tom, I think you called me one of those afternoons and I was without sleep, and very thankful for your call checking in on us. But really proud of the program that we did ultimately step up, and I'll let Mike run through some statistics with you. But ultimately, those loans got into the hands of small business owners, which we know are so important to us in North Texas. I know you're aware of the North Texas market here, but almost half of our economy is made up of small businesses. So it was really important for us to adhere to the Department of Treasury's guidelines. So we worked hand in hand with him and them, but really to get it into the right hands. So I'll let Mike run through some of the statistics.
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer, and good to be with you, Tom, and with your audience here. Across the board, we funded, in conjunction with the SBA, over 327,000 loans under the PPP program, and that totaled $25 billion in funds that got into our clients' hands, our customers' hands, and they truly did need it. And here in Texas, we saw a large portion of that. So we funded more than 25,000 applications through the SBA here in Texas for the PPP program. And that was about $1.6 billion in funding there alone. And really it was spread all over the state. So we saw it in just about every market. Houston had the highest participation in Texas, and we did about $574 million worth of fundings there. Here in Fort Worth, we did $115 million supporting small business. Dallas did over $500 million. San Antonio, $89 million, and even out in our West Texas markets, Amarillo and El Paso, we saw great participation there as well. And as Jennifer mentioned, it got in the hands of small businesses, and the average loan size that we saw under this program was $64,000. So just think about that, those aggregate numbers that we talked about into the hundreds of millions, but those loan sizes getting to the small businesses where they needed to be. More than 80% of those loans went to businesses with 10 or fewer employees, and only 1% went to companies with more than 100 employees. So we truly did see the impact. We saw it getting to where it needed to be in Texas, and we're really proud to take part in that program. Now we're entering that next phase, which is working in conjunction with the SBA as they roll out some of the new rules and regulations. In mid-June, they added some and clarified some of the legislation around the PPP program. So the next part of it's really going to be getting into that forgiveness and the repayment portion. And there's a lot of information on the SBA website out there around this program. And our job is going to be just working with our clients to make sure they understand the program and that they're able to take care of that second phase of it.
And that was the next question. You anticipated that. It's often so hard for the small business to navigate all those regulations, and I assume you all are working with them closely to kind of hold everybody's hand and through this process, because it's so Byzantine at times. And I assume that's something you all are really focused on, is how do you enter that and successfully complete that second phase?
Absolutely. And I don't know that people are always aware, but our consumer locations have been phenomenal, and our small business bankers, they've actually been making a number of outbound calls to help educate our clients and folks on all the opportunities they have, not only with PPP, but other programs for small businesses. But it's a lot of proactive phone calls, and to your point, really helping to ensure they understand the process and getting those applications in. We're thrilled to see more time with the forgiveness process. I think that's going to help, where initially that first phase of PPP was just such a mad rush to get those applications in. Now I think folks have been able to catch their breath, really understand the process. But again, we're often pointing to the SBA as well, as some of those guidelines change very rapidly. But lots of outbound phone calls and conversations with each and every one of our clients. And as big as we are, we take pride in making those phone calls to make sure we're reaching every one of them.
And along those same lines of the general economic recovery, I know you all monitor consumer spending in each of the regions and areas of the state. What are you all seeing about how fast, how slow the economy is recovering? What are you all seeing across the Texas market?
It is encouraging. And to your point, we do have a robust CIO office, so we're often following their guidance, but a great lens into the economy for us is just that, as you mentioned, the consumer spending. So banking every other household, that's a great way for us to see how things are trending. And to answer your question, they're trending in the right direction. And I know we're watching a number of indicators, including employment, but as it relates to spending, we had that significant drop off, as we all anticipated, with about a 27% drop off early on in the crisis. But the good news is that is continuing to trend in the right direction. So in May, that dropped to about 12% year over year, still, painful, but improving. And then in June, continues to improve. So early June, spending was down about 5 to 6%. And we're thrilled to see just last week that started to look flat year over year. But as we watch this spike, again, we'll be watching each and every day very closely. And obviously hospitality, some industries are impacted much harder than others. But retail has been really strong in Texas, and again, we'll continue to monitor it. The credit side has been a bit more conservative, and we're actually really pleased to see that. People have been very conservative with their borrowing. In Texas, first week of June, we saw about a 2% decrease in credit card spending. But again, feel good about those numbers. Overall, GDP, again, a really challenging year, and I'll just tell you, we're still looking at about negative 5.7% GDP growth this year. But if you think about where we were, that number was negative 8 just a few weeks ago. So we'll continue to watch the trends. I know you're hearing lots about V's and W's and U's and whatnot.
Backwards and forward.
Seeing,
I mean, I've lost track of all the letters that people are describing the economy.
That's right. We're going to stick with some V's in most sectors, Tom, but we'll keep watching. And Tom, you know better than anybody else, but the great thing, Texas is usually last in and first out. So we think that's the case here too, but we'll keep watching those numbers.
Mike, what are you seeing Fort Worth and West? You seeing much different than what Jennifer said? I know the Permian Basin, certainly. I mean, the Texas, we had that double whammy. How are you assessing what's happening in West Texas and in Tarrant County?
Well, that's right, Tom. And, I think we've heard it all said that Texas, it's not just one economy. It's more like 5 separate economies as you look at the different geographic regions that comprise the state. And you're hearing very similar stories. I mean, our clients and Texans in general, Texas business people are very resilient. So they're going to figure out a way to get things done. But when you talk to the folks in the Panhandle and out in West Texas, they have some different dynamics than what we may see in the urban areas. And Panhandle, Amarillo area, for example, we talk to our clients and peers out there, and agribusiness is such a big deal for them. And in addition to the impacts of the pandemic, they had the whipsaw effect of commodity prices and the beef prices and cattle prices all moving in different directions. And those things there's still ripple effects that they're dealing with in regard to that right now, in addition to just the general economic conditions that we're all experiencing. And then out in the oil patch, it's certainly no surprise to anyone on this call, the impact that the energy downturns had out there. And it's impacted the consumer sentiment a little bit as well, because again, you've got pandemic effects of the economy, and you've got cash flow effects for all those that work in that oil field service industry, trying to navigate through that. But like we said, there's certainly bright spots, and Texans are resilient, and they're going to find a way to work through all these various challenges that we're faced with.
Well, and as we have experienced and gone through this pandemic, I think we've all realized that the pandemic itself has also, it's part of what I call a perfect storm, and it's also revealed a lot of other issues that we knew existed in our society, but it's kind of like an earthquake. It kind of revealed a lot of aspects of our landscape we weren't focused on, and one of them has certainly been the racial divide, the equitable disparity issues. And I know Jennifer, Bank of America, has been very proactive in terms of these issues. Tell us a little bit about how you as a bank and institution, both internally and externally, are trying to address some of these, not some of these, all this racial divide that we're all dealing with, and equity disparities that people are really focused on, I think.
Thank you for asking. It's an important question, Tom. And to your point, we had absolutely seen the racial disparity and the impact of COVID. And so in addition to all the work we do as it relates to diversity and inclusion, which is quite robust, we had really started to dive into those numbers, looking at that impact. And so we had a group coming together at the national level in partnership with a committee that includes folks from the NAACP, UNIDOS, and others. And so we were looking at a $500 million fund to help address that economic disparity. And what we ended up doing with the racial distress we saw across the country and the unfortunate death of George Floyd, which was just heartbreaking, it really drove that sense of urgency. And I was so pleased that Brian Moynihan was able to come down with our board and our firm to double on that commitment. So we took that commitment from $500 million to $1 billion. And I have to tell you, Tom, those were some sleepless nights, and I saw a number of firms coming out with statements. And I think I've heard you mention that Texas 2036 is not just a think tank, but a do tank. And that's what we like to do at Bank of America, is really take action. So I have to tell you, that $1 billion commitment is our commitment to take that action. So we'll be working across the country, and in fact, here in Texas, to address the issues that we've seen. And Texas 2036 will be one of the groups we look to the data. Is what we'll be looking at is sustainable, impactful programs to help address the racial disparity that we're seeing. But I would say that's the beginning of a lot of work that's going to be ahead. We've also made a $25 million commitment to the Smithsonian Institute for some work they're doing and some research that focuses on how Americans address race issues. So we have a number of commitments going on, a great deal of work. And I would say it's also some courageous conversations we're having here locally in each and every office. And Mike and I just led one of those yesterday for the Dallas-Fort Worth market. It was an incredible conversation. So our diversity and inclusion efforts will remain a big priority for us and have been for many years. It's not new to us. Over 45% of our workforce is made up of people of color, but we know we have work to do. So I appreciate the question, Tom, and it'll be something Mike and I work hand in hand with community leaders to address, and so important. But we'll be looking to Texas 2036 to help us measure it and be accountable to that work.
Mike, I assume, this diversity and inclusion issue is also very much focused not only on our Black community, but our Latino community. And, you look at the diversity of our state, and we feel very strongly the diversity of our state needs to be our asset and our strength. And I assume you're, one of the interesting maps we published at Texas 2036 was a map that showed in each county the country from which the second largest number of people migrated to that county, other than Mexico. And you look at that map and it just blows people away. I mean, you see countries like Bangladesh and China and Vietnam, and, the diversity of our state is just remarkable. And I know that's even true, even though people don't think of it in those terms. That's true in West Texas. I mean, we have great diversity throughout our state. And I assume you see that in your market going west, don't you, Mike?
You do. You see it all across the state. And there's really fantastic stories when you get behind how these immigration patterns affected Texas and where people decided to live and where they came from. And that diversity really is part of the richness of what we have here in Texas. And it really gives us a vibrancy, not only from a cultural standpoint, but also from an economic development and that a workforce perspective. You get all kinds of varying perspectives and experiences, and so tapping into that is extremely important. And when we look at our customer base, that's part of how we look at them. Is we need to meet our customers where they are when they need us, and that may be in a different language, that may be digitally, it may be any sort of way to make sure we're addressing them and as they need us and being there for them. But yeah, we see that out in West Texas quite a bit, and frankly, those are parts of their opportunities, but there are also challenges as well, as when you talk about bridging gaps and removing barriers and providing access to education and to economic development and things like that. So we got to be very mindful of all of our Texans and where they come from and what their needs are.
Jennifer, am I changing the subject? We have a lot of people viewing these, whether they be small or medium business or large. We're all grappling with how do we safely reopen our businesses. And I know it's really a remarkable story about how quickly American enterprise adjusted to a virtual world. But how are you thinking about the physical world in terms of, and I learned a valuable lesson one day. I slipped and said, we're talking about people getting back to work, and everybody jumped down my throat and said, wait a minute, we've been working 24/7. And they have. But
that is
absolutely
right.
Physically, how are you thinking about reopening in the future? And how much do you think will remain virtual versus back to physical?
That's right, Tom. I know so many organizations are focused on that right now, and you're exactly right. It's back to office, not back to work. We're very clear with that because I think we've been incredibly productive. But it was really incredible to see how nimble we were with over 208,000 people globally, how quickly we were able to move them to work at home remotely. And that was a lot of creativity. A lot of our investment in our digital platform started to pay off, but it took all of us really getting creative and distributing more laptops and Chromebooks and whatever it took. But our safety of our associates has remained the top priority, as I know it is for many firms. But we were thankfully able to move quickly to get our folks home. And the great news is that it's working incredibly well. So knowing that we're effective, we will be very slow to return to office. Our banking centers have remained open as a critical business. And I'm so proud of our folks. They have been the front line just day in and day out through all of this. But of course, we've taken the measures there to distance our clients, masks, hand sanitizers, and all the requirements there. So we're working closely with the CDC on that, and our banking centers will remain open. And then some critical staff has continued to come in, but it's a very small number for us. We were also able to be very creative around childcare, as many of the childcare facilities were closed. So we increased our childcare coverage and allowed folks to not only look at childcare facilities, but family and loved ones that they could trust during this time. And many of our associates took advantage of that reimbursement. But I'll let Mike comment more, but we'll work hand in hand and take it down to every office, every associate as we plan our next steps.
Yeah, and I had the opportunity to work here with Mayor Betsy Price and her committee on reopening the economy, and really learn some lessons by being part of that group that had leaders from healthcare and government, and then folks from industry all across Tarrant County, and really represent a cross section of our economy. And one of the things I took away from that was there's no one size fits all solution that's going to work. That what works for a retail establishment may not work for a restaurant, nor may it work for a manufacturer or a financial institutions firm. And took that and really applied that to how we're looking at it from Bank of America's perspective, because we're an organization that's made up of 8 different lines of business, many different operating profiles and postures. And so we have to look at each one of those segments of our business and think about the best way to return to office or the best way to continue to deliver that in the case of the financial center, always with the customer in mind and how are we going to serve them best. But now also, how are we going to keep that customer safe and how are we going to keep our associates safe and healthy as well? So to Jennifer's point, it really is looking at each element of our business and applying a specific approach to that element that may not be the same as the other business unit right next to it.
Well, I guess we're kind of running short of time, but Jennifer, I cannot help but ask. I know as a parent, is it 2 children or 3? I can't remember.
We have
2,
4
right?
children.
4 children. Okay,
Yes.
so 4. So you've been a virtual executive at Bank of America and a teacher the last 3 months. Are you ready to vote for a pay raise for teachers?
Absolutely. I have a great appreciation for our Texas educators. I have to tell you that, sir. But absolutely. And I will applaud their creativity and how quickly they stepped up that digital learning, but it's been a challenge.
It really has. And, you know, as we think about reopening schools and the challenges of that, we face some big challenges ahead of us. So, you know, we've not survived the pandemic storm, that's for sure. But I want to thank both of you and Bank of America. You know, our banking institutions are going to be critical as we try to come out of this storm. And it's an important aspect of our recovery is making sure small businesses are banked, if you will, if that's a proper use of the English language. But I want to thank you all for what you're doing, and thank you for your support of Texas 2036. And keep lending that money, would you?
Absolutely. We're all in this together. Tom, I appreciate you visiting with us this morning. Thank you.
Thank you all for watching Straight Talk Texas. If you have questions and feedback, we want to hear from you. Email us at straighttalk@texas2036.org and follow us on social media and sign up to receive our emails. Visit texas2036.org for more information. Until next time, wishing you and your family well.